We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Vav Amid Aleph Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 76a. On the previous Amid, Rabbi Shimon said in the Mishnah that if you have an animal that's an asham that gets mixed up with an animal that is a shlomim, so then you treat the two animals like the stricter of them, meaning to say, for example, an asham is only eaten for a day and a night, a shlomim is 2 days and a night, so in this case you'll just eat for a day and a night, and it's not a problem of mevi'in kachim lebeis apsol. One might think that this would be problematic because by restricting the amount of time, it's possible that it will then be disqualified. You won't have enough time to eat it, etc. But Rabbi Shimon says that's not a problem. And on the previous Amud, the Gemara asked on this, and Rabbah ended up saying that Rabbi Shimon only says mevi'in kachim lebeis apsol in a b'di'evet situation. Here already the animals got mixed. It's after the fact. So then we're lenient and we're not concerned about mevi'in kachim lebeis apsol. But lechatchila, Rabbi Shimon would agree, ein mevi'in kachim lebeis apsol. That is what Rabbah said within the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and the Gemara now asks from a Mishnah coming up. The Mishnah says, "V'chulon rashoyin kohanim lishnos b'achiloson la'achlon etzeluyin shlukin umevushalim." When it comes to kachim, so the kohanim are allowed to deviate or change the way they eat them. They can eat it roasted, they can eat it boiled, they can eat it cooked. V'loses l'sochan tavle chulin v'tavle truman. They can put inside of it. They can use spices of chulin, and they can even use spices of truma. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. These are the words of Rabbi Yishmael. And so the point over here is, even though you're now minimizing the amount of time that you can eat the truma really, there's no time limit, but now that you're having it together with karbanos, together with kachim, so that would be minimizing the amount of time. That would be a situation of bringing kachim leveis apsul. And the Shinuya Nuschos notes that instead of divrei Rabbi Yishmael, it should be tzarach lomar Rabbi Shimon. It should be divrei Rabbi Shimon. So you see over here that lechatchila you're allowed to use spices of truma. So apparently Rabbi Shimon says even lechatchila mevi'in kachim lebeis apsul. And the Gemara continues, Amar Lei, he said back to him, this is Rabbah responding, Hanach l'trumas tavlin d'Rabbanan, leave aside trumas tavlin, the truma of spices, that's only truma on a d'Rabbanan level, that's why we're able to be more lenient in this situation. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei, we ask the following question, he asked him the following question from a Mishnah in Meiser Sheni, Ein lochin truma bekesef Meiser, you can't purchase truma with the money of Meiser, this is talking about the money of Meiser Sheni, Mipnei shememayit b'achilasa, because again you minimize, this is talking about the location, you minimize the area where the truma can now be eaten, because when you purchase with kesef Meiser Sheni, it has to be eaten in Yerushalayim, that's what the Tanakama says. For Rabbi Shimon Matir, Rabbi Shimon says it's permitted, and again we see lechatchila, apparently Rabbi Shimon says mevi'in kachim lebeis apsul lechatchila, and so therefore again that's a question against Rabbah. And the Gemara says ishtik le. The Gemara says he's silent, and this is Rabbah was silent to Abaya. And the Gemara continues, Kiyasa lakami de Rav Yosef. Now when Abaya came before Rav Yosef, Amar le, so Rav Yosef said to him, he said to Abaya, Amai lo tosvei meha, why don't you ask him, or why didn't you ask him a question from the following Mishnah in Meseches Shvius? The Mishnah says, Ein mevashlan yerek shel Shvius b'shemen shel truma. You're not allowed to cook yerek, vegetable of Shvius, that's a vegetable of the Shemitah year, in oil of truma. Shelo yaviu kachim lebeis apsul. Again, an issue of you shouldn't bring the kachim lebeis apsul. Another situation where the truma is going to have to be treated with the same restrictions as produce of Shvius. For Rabbi Shimon Matir, and Rabbi Shimon permits it again. Rabbi Shimon seems to say lechatchila that mevi'in kachim lebeis apsul. Amar le Abaya, so Abaya said to him, he said back to Rav Yosef, V'lav mi osivise mehad tavlin. Didn't I ask him a question from the case of the spices just above? V'yomar li, and he said to me, Hanach l'trumas tavlin d'Rabbanan. He said, well, leave that aside, because the truma by spices is just d'Rabbanan. So hachanami trumas yerek d'Rabbanan. Here also he'll have a simple response. We're talking about vegetables over here, so he'll say trumas yerek is just d'Rabbanan. The Gemara says, well, that would not have been a good response. If so, if we're talking here about trumas yerek, it did not say in the Mishnah that it did not say that the truma was yerek. It said it was shemen shel truma. It said it was a yerek of shvius, vegetables of the Shemitah year with shemen shel truma. So that's what he says. If so, it would have said the reverse. It should have said mi boile lemisni. It should have said the reverse. Yerek shel truma b'shemen shel shvius. It should have said it was vegetable of truma with shemen of the Shemitah year. And so therefore that would not have been a response. But the Gemara continues and says, V'lav mi osvise, but didn't I also ask him, Shimon. This is what Abaya says back. Didn't I already ask him a question? Mimas Nisin Demater Rabbi Shimon. From our Mishnah, where again Rabbi Shimon says permitted. V'yamar li, he said to me that you can't ask from the Mishnah diyarev because it already was mixed. It's b'di'evid. So hachanami diyarev. So too over here diyarev. It was already mixed. In other words, the case over here is we have a different response. He would not have been able to respond that we're talking about the Rabbanon because again it was the shemen that was truma, and shemen would have been a d'oraisa truma. If you're talking about, let's say, the shemen, the oil that comes from zaysim, that comes from olives. But here, what he could have responded is he could have said diyar if it was already mixed together. In other words, the case over here was that there already was a mixture of the shemen shel truma with the yerek shel shvius, and therefore once it's b'di'evid, that's why Rabbi Shimon would permit it. But the Gemara says idiyare. But the Gemara says 1 second, if it was mixed up, so then my taimai with the Rabbanon. What's the reason of the Rabbanon? In other words, in this Mishnah about mevashlan yerek, it says again, according to Rabbi Shimon, mevashlan yerek shel shvius b'shemen shel truma. We're saying it's b'di'evid, it was already mixed. But if that's the case, it was already mixed. So what's the reason of the Rabbanon? Why would the Rabbanon say you're not allowed to be mevashal? You can cook it, but it's already after the fact. What else are you going to do at this point in time? And the Gemara says, Midi dehave asham u'shlamim. No, it's similar to the case of the asham and shlamim, meaning in our Mishnah by the asham and shlamim also, it was after the fact and the Rabbanan are strict. And so here too, the Rabbanan are strict even after the fact. But the Gemara says, that's not a good answer. Midami, can you compare the two? Hasam islay takanta b'riyah. The reason why the Rabbanan are strict in our Mishnah is because there actually is an alternate solution. There's a solution of letting the animals graze and develop a blemish, again, as we said earlier. That's why the Rabbanan are strict even after the fact. But here, halesle takanta b'riyah. Here there's no takana by letting them graze, for example. There's no such takana. You have a situation after the fact. Again, the oil and the vegetables mixed. There's nothing that really can be done. And if we're talking after the fact, why would the Rabbanan be strict in such a case? Halo dummy, if you're going to compare it, this is really only comparable. Ela lechaticha shebechatichos. It's, let's say, it's already the cuts of meat get mixed together. You can't let it graze anymore because the animals have already been slaughtered, etc. To cave into less takanta, there we said, according to Rabbanan, since there's no solution, to ochel kechamer shebehen, that you actually eat it according to what is stricter, and the Rabbanan are not worried about mevi'in kachim lebeis hapsol b'di'evid in that case, and so therefore that would not have been a good answer. In other words, Rabbah could not have responded that this Mishnah is talking b'di'evid, because if the Mishnah was talking b'di'evid, the Rabbanan would have been lenient as well. And the Gemara continues, Maskef lo Ravina. Ravina asks on this, Midami, can you really compare it? Is it really similar to Chaticha shebechatichos? Chaticha shebechatichos, less lo takanta klal. By the Chaticha shebechatichos, there is no solution whatsoever. That's why we'd be makel. But hi, islay takanta, here with the vegetables and the oil, there actually is a solution. What's the solution? Beschita. You can squeeze out the oil from the vegetables. But the Gemara says, Rav Yosef, now Rav Yosef would say that's not true. There really isn't a solution. Because because how are you going to squeeze it out? Nischot, if you're going to squeeze out a lot to get it all out, kamafsid b'shvius, you're actually going to be ruining, you're going to be destroying this produce of shvius. And nischot porsiv, you're just going to squeeze it a little, so still it's mixed together. At the end, that's not going to solve anything. And so therefore, Rav Yosef says over here, really, there is no solution in this situation. And since there is no solution in this situation, again, the Rabbanan really should have been lenient in such a case. And that is why, in Rav Yosef's view, there really was no response that Rabbah could give, because if Rabbah is going to try to answer that it's b'di'evid, it can't be we're talking b'di'evid, because again, then the Rabbanan, they should be lenient as well. And the Gemara continues, Eisve, he asked the following question, this is from a Braisa. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, L'macharas, the next day, Mevi Ashamo velugo imo, he brings the carbon asham, and he brings the lug of oil as well. V'yomer, and he says as follows, he makes the following stipulation, Im shel mitzora, if this is of mitzora, Hareza Ashamo v'zelugo, this is the asham, and this is the log shaman. And Rashi explains the case in the Braisa, L'macharas, B'safek mitzora muchlat, B'safek eino muchlat kai. The case over here is, we have a doubt whether this is a confirmed mitzora, or whether he's not a confirmed mitzora. L'macharas b'yom hashmini, so we're talking about L'macharas the next day, means on the 8th day. This is the 8th day of the purification process. And the next Rashis belong on the next Amud, but we will read them as well, because the Brisa is going to go on to say that what does he do in this case? Shchita b'tzafon uvahonos. He has to treat it. The case over here is that we're not really sure what kind of carbon is being brought. Is it like an asham? Is it like a shlamim? So it says he should slaughter it in the north and do the procedure with the thumbs, kechomer asham, meaning following the stringency as if it's an asham. Usmichu nesachmu tenufas chazav v'shok, and then lean on the animal in libations and wave the chazav v'shok, kechomer shlamim, treating it like the stringency of a shlamim as well. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Vav Amid Beis.